Hi, I'm Dr. Craig Malkin, and welcome back to my podcast for my brand new book, Rethinking Narcissism, The Bad and Surprising Good About Feeling Special. Today, I'm going to be talking about recognizing and coping with unhealthy narcissism, and in particular, recognizing and coping with narcissists. As you've learned from previous episodes, the problem that we have is that we get focused on a particular image of narcissist, that loud, boastful braggart or the vain person, and that is not all kinds of narcissists, and it's not all kinds of narcissism, and some people can be extremely quiet. So one of the reasons I wrote Rethinking Narcissism was to give people much clearer understanding and a much easier way of spotting trouble than they've had so far, because it really just focuses on most of the writings, most of the books, most of what you read on the internet focuses on the more obvious kinds of narcissism that really apparently we're actually very adept at seeing. And I don't know that we need to hear a whole lot more about that. I think we've kind of covered that. Rethinking Narcissism is really the new science of spotting and coping with narcissists. It draws on my research that I did with my colleagues. It draws on more recent research to help us have a deeper understanding of what all narcissism is and what all unhealthy narcissism is. So in this episode, I'm going to help you with some practical tips on how to spot and handle narcissism across your relationships, with a spouse or a partner. What happens if you see it in your parent or a child? How do you spot and handle narcissism in a coworker or a boss? Again, drawing on all of this new science that until now has not been made available. And I wanted to give it away. I wanted to make it possible for you, the readers, or for you people who need help with all of this, to make use of this incredibly helpful information. Oh, you already know, if you've been listening so far, that what makes someone extremely narcissistic is that they are afraid to depend on others. When they're feeling sad or scared or lonely or upset in any way, they become dependent on or addicted to feeling special in any number of ways, whether it's like by feeling like the most attractive, good-looking person in the room, or the most misunderstood person in the room, or the most helpful person in the room, or even the most distressed person in the room. All kinds of ways to feel special, which is why you need to understand what I call the tells, the signs that show up even early on, precisely because of the way people who are extremely narcissistic learn to cope, regardless of what form their narcissism takes. So what are these tells? What are these giveaways? Well, when you are invested in feeling special, so much so that you turn away from other ways of seeking comfort, care, support, that also leaves you unable to be open to vulnerable feelings and to share them directly. That is one of the side effects of developing unhealthy narcissism and becoming extremely narcissistic, is discomfort with vulnerability. Again, this fear of depending on others in times of need, or when we have longings for closeness, when we feel overwhelmed, when most of us feel that way if we are capable of securely turning to others, of secure love in our relationships, or even secure connection in our friendships. We can ask them for help. We can share what's going on. We can invite them closer. But if you're afraid of doing that, then you have to find ways to dodge vulnerability. It's the vulnerability dodge that gives extremely narcissistic people away, even if they are quiet. What happens is we all, from time to time, use these various strategies, and I outline I outline quite a few of them in my chapter in Rethinking Narcissism on Spotting and Coping with Unhealthy Narcissism, in a chapter on early warning signs to help you spot a narcissist. It's not the typical that you've heard if somebody likes to talk about themselves a lot, or they seem to spend too much time in the mirror, or they're loud mouths and they always bring the conversation back to themselves. That's true of some narcissists. Again, it's not true of all. And so it's not very helpful, especially at the beginning of the relationships, as you've already experienced many times when you start dating someone. In the beginning of the relationship, you might see all kinds of wonderful qualities. I want to repeat what I said earlier. No one generally falls in love with a jerk. The bad parts evolve, they come out over time. The reason that happens, by the way, is because the more time we spend with someone, the more we have to learn to be open to them about our deeper needs and feelings, and that's what becomes challenging for somebody who's extremely narcissistic. So there are these vulnerability dodges. One of the clearest signs is something I call emotion phobia. And people who are extremely narcissistic, they don't like to say I need things. They don't like to say that I'm upset about something. Instead, they might get angry, and they might just shut down. They might just completely shut down. And what I want to say about this tell, or any of the tells I describe in Rethinking Narcissism, is that what they all have in common, even though we all use them from time to time, because we all are capable of handling our insecurity in this way occasionally, with narcissists, they tend to use them more frequently and always in some way to feel superior. So again, getting back to emotion phobia, what happens is if somebody's extremely narcissistic, they don't want to come out and they don't want to share that they're feeling vulnerable in this way. They might shut down, they might get angry. But more importantly, if you're in a relationship with them, what you see, even in the subtler forms, even early on, is that they can't stay with feelings that you're having. This might not take the form right away of being completely unempathic. You might even see expressions of concern or something cross their face that shows that they're being affected by what you're saying. But what you also see is that somebody who's extremely narcissistic, or even just subtle unhealthy narcissism, will turn away from feelings that you yourself bring up, like sadness, loneliness, worry, because they don't want to go there. So I had a client whose girlfriend, whenever he brought up anything the least bit sensitive, his worries about work, things that were bothering him, at one point his mother was sick and he wanted to say a little bit about that, she would literally start cleaning. She might have an initial reaction, but she would literally start cleaning anything to sort of move away from that conversation. That's an example of emotion phobia. She never got mean. She never said anything directly like, why are you talking about this? But you can see that too. I mean, one dead giveaway for somebody being narcissistic, say you're talking to them about the difficult time you had over the weekend with your kids, where everybody has one of those weekends where everything seems to go wrong and you just feel overwhelmed and feel like you can't do anything right. Or you're talking to your friend about school and you're having trouble and you're feeling really unsure of yourself in a class, and that friend, or maybe in the case of this situation at school, an acquaintance says, oh, I don't know what you mean. I don't feel that way. Obviously, that's a way of feeling superior. It's sort of sending the message It's strange that you would feel that way. I couldn't possibly understand those feelings. And that's a good example of emotion phobia. There's also, with that one, obviously an air of condescension, but it can take much subtler forms, like the example I gave of my client whose girlfriend would start cleaning when he tried to talk about anything difficult. That is an example of emotion phobia. And anyone who's extremely narcissistic will, whether they are quiet, whether they are boastful and loud, maybe they won't be in the beginning of the relationship, whether they consider themselves the best and the most altruistic person you've ever met, they will show those signs, because you cannot avoid normal human feelings of vulnerability without these kinds of predictable signs. One more I want to share, because there's a lot that I go into detail in the book, but one of them that's so common, especially in the workplace, is something I call playing emotional hot potato. You do want to think of this very much like playing hot potato with feelings of insecurity. Again, because extremely narcissistic people don't want to say, I'm unsure of myself, or I'm feeling kind of shaky today, or I don't really know what to do. Very commonly, what they will do instead is say and do things to make you feel those feelings, to sort of undermine your sense of being centered or sure or secure. Almost like they're saying, I don't want to take this feeling, here, you take it. That is playing emotional hot potato. So a good example is you're talking to your boss, and the boss is probably having a bad day or isn't sure about the project that you're working on, or that the whole team is working on a project. And rather than say, I'm a little concerned about things today, they start tearing into you and saying, well, why did you do it this way? And maybe there's a different way to do it. I'm not sure that's the best way to go about it. And it's just sort of one thing after another about how maybe you're not thinking about things properly or clearly, or just going about this wrong. Obviously, that's a way of propping oneself up. I mean, the maneuver is, I'm the one in the know here. I know what's going on, and you don't. I have the wisdom that you do not have. And this is going to happen with parents as well. And you think of if you're struggling with narcissism, a parent, it would take the form of, as you get older, none of your decisions make any sense. In the subtler form, if you've never been physically or emotionally abused, where your parent called you names or just mistreated you in clear ways, the sense of superiority or arrogance can come out in these subtler ways of just always taking the stance that somehow you're never going to figure out the world the way they have. And that can happen with partners too. What I want to make really clear is the advantage of taking this new science and applying it to relationships in general is that it really helps us spot trouble across all kinds of different relationships. Spouses and partners might use might demonstrate emotion phobia, and they might use playing emotional hot potato. Certainly parents will show signs of emotion phobia, shutting down when you try to talk about something of emotional importance, or they get quiet, or they don't know how to talk about it. They won't necessarily, for people who find it very confusing why they experienced a childhood where they just never really felt quite confident or secure in themselves. When they dig deep, they notice that this is something that they experienced in their childhood. And again, as I mentioned, in the workplace, playing emotional hot potato is very, very common. It happens all the time. So those are a couple of early warning signs that show up across different kinds of extreme narcissism. And again, what they all have in common is their ways of dodging vulnerability. So what do you do if you see them? What if you see them in a partner? What do you do if you see them in a child? I'm going to touch on that a little bit, specifically what things look like in children, and or if you see these signs in the workplace. Well, the first thing I want to go over, because it is extremely important, is what I call the 3 stop signs for any relationship, but particularly for romantic relationships, for friendships. Most of the time people are struggling with this in romantic relationships. Before you consider using any of the strategies that I will recommend now, and that I recommend in detail, many strategies in the book, research-backed strategies, you need to consider these 3 stop signs. The first stop sign is emotional or physical abuse. Emotional abuse consists of things like put-downs, name-calling, not the kind of criticism that is very common according to researcher John Gottman. Many couples get into bad interactions where one partner is critical of the other. That's not uncommon in distressed relationships. It's one of the most common patterns, again. We're not talking about that. We're talking about relentless criticism. There's really about tearing somebody's ego down, where they're left feeling like they're always wrong. They can never do anything right. They're always to blame. Worse, another form of emotional abuse that can take place when somebody is extremely manipulative. I'm going to get into that as one of the stop signs. But in other words, when they're malignant narcissists, who I described earlier, is something called gaslighting. And this is a very insidious form of emotional abuse, because what the form it takes is, this is the partner who, when you feel like something is wrong, when you know something is up, they try to convince you that you're not seeing reality clearly. Maybe you're just being paranoid. You're seeing things that aren't really there. That receipt that you found on the table, that's not what you think it is, even though your gut tells you something different. This is called gaslighting, and it's a form of emotional abuse, and it can be incredibly damaging to our sense of self. It can certainly be damaging to our self-esteem and our confidence. And obviously, physical abuse, if somebody is laying on hands, if somebody is being hurtful, if somebody is making you feel physically unsafe, if you see those signs and a person is not getting help and is not willing to make changes, it is not safe enough to even try to work on the relationship. As a couples therapist, I don't see couples where there's ongoing emotional or physical abuse. Not all extremely narcissistic people become abusive. Some do. Many with NPD do, but again, not all. Some can just be aloof and insensitive and arrogant, but not overtly abusive. But if you do experience abuse, and the person is not getting help, and they are not seeking any kind of program to help them stop their abuse, the abuse is 100% on the responsibility of the abuser. It doesn't matter what you say or you don't say. Nobody has a right to respond with abuse. That is a stop sign. And if they won't seek help, and if they're not trying, you really need to get professional help yourself to consider what your next steps are. Which, in most cases, when I'm working with someone, I try to help them leave if the person is not actually making those changes. The second stop sign is denial. I hinted at this in the first stop sign, but if you're with somebody who's struggling with alcoholism or unhealthy narcissism or any problem, if they can't even acknowledge it, if they can't recognize it, it's not going to change. There are people who have narcissistic personality disorder even. They come to my practice. I see them. I've seen them over the years. I've helped many. who recognize that there's something wrong. If your partner, friend, loved one can't at least say, I think I'm in trouble, I think there's something going on here, then again, that's a stop sign. In fact, in the research, denial was one of the worst predictors of unhealthy narcissism. The people who use denial throughout their life over time, when they were kids and then when they were teens and then when they were young adults, turned out to show some of the nastiest signs of narcissism. So denial is a terrible sign. And the third stop sign is psychopathy, a cold, remorseless pattern of lies and manipulation. Obviously, someone who gaslights is showing signs of psychopathy. And there is evidence, neuroimaging evidence, that people high in psychopathy do not experience feelings in the same way. And unlike someone who is just struggling with unhealthy narcissism, who we know from the research is blocked in empathy, it's their preoccupation with their own needs or their own vulnerabilities that they can't fully experience and bring to you and express, that keeps them from being able to see the world or hear the world that you're describing from your point of view, that blocks their empathy. Unlike people who only have unhealthy narcissism, people who struggle with psychopathy may not experience empathy at all. They have true, genuine, and maybe neurologically based empathy blocks. And I have very little hope for a relationship where there are signs of psychopathy. If you see any of these three signs, you need to get help figuring out what your next steps are. In my book, Rethinking Narcissism, in fact, I skip you ahead to, when the person can't change and thinking about leaving. What if you're not seeing signs of hope? So once we're past those three stop signs, because you might be in one of those relationships where you're not experiencing emotional abuse or physical abuse, where the person really isn't denial. They have no problem even saying, boy, sometimes I'm having problems with my relationships, or things aren't going well at work, or even in their marriage, and they're not showing signs of psychopathy. Then there are some things that you can do. Again, I offer very clear templates based on the science. One of the approaches that I recommend is actually based on couples research, and it integrates the research on the most effective couples therapies that we know, and the research on what reduces narcissism in people. I'm going to try to touch on that. It's going to be hard for me to get into detail in just in this podcast, but first let me give you some simple things. So because we know now from the research that people who are extremely narcissistic are blocked in empathy, that is, they can show signs of empathy. You may have a friend, you may have a partner where you'll see flashes of empathy, where, it's that experience of why can you be so nice to everybody and so understanding and so caring? The temptation, especially in the blogosphere, is to write that off as, oh, well, it's not real empathy. And that's fine when you've left the relationship to see it that way. It gives you some distance. But when you're in it, of course, most people who are close to that person and love them feel it. And to them, they experience it as this person is being empathic. So where did it go? Why does it disappear? And again, what's happening is something comes up, something troubling that person, something that, something that is on their mind. And, suddenly the empathy vanishes. I had one client I worked with whose husband was really known for being caring around the office and where he worked, and just not just charming, but helpful and a great lister. And she even knew him that way. But whenever something came up that troubled his sense of his standing at work, so for example, he was up for promotion and it looked like he wasn't going to get it. His empathy for her just kind of vanished. When she would try to talk about something, he would change this, upsetting to her, like something that happened with the kids during the day. He would change the subject. He just became insensitive. And then when things settled down, suddenly her husband was back. That is not an unusual pattern. It can be extremely confusing, but it is a sign of unhealthy narcissism. So what I recommend, one simple approach I recommend, and you can do this with parents, you can do this with your child, you can do this in the workplace, is something I call catching good. That is because there are moments where even the most narcissistic person might be showing the capacity for caring and connection, and they might even be listening. In that moment when you see it, we know that what encourages more behavior that you would prefer in any relationship is reward, is reinforcement, is attention. So the tendency is to want to confront people on their obnoxiousness. When somebody's extremely narcissistic, often that just makes them more narcissistic and defensive. What I often say is, when you think about it, if you think about yourself and you're not a particularly narcissistic person, how do you respond when somebody is accusatory or, tells you what you're doing wrong? You get angry and defensive usually, unless you shut down. But either way, you don't engage. Most of us don't, and we know that from the research. So in this case, what's far more effective is to focus on a moment. So, for example, I had one client whose friend could sometimes really be there for her. Maybe a lot of times, if I'm looking back on her discussion of the relationship. But whenever something came up in her life, when she's having trouble in her relationship with her boyfriend, or she was having trouble of some other kind, my client would try to talk to her, it would be like talking to a wall. Not only would she change the subject, she would say, you worry too much, or something deeply invalidating. What I coached her to do was to catch good with this friend. In a moment when she was with her at lunch and she was really listening closely to her, in this case, her mother had just been diagnosed with breast cancer, my client. And she was trying to talk about that. And in the previous week, her friend had shown concern, had shown understanding. And so what she did is she said, I love it when we talk this way. This is what reminds me. It's this side of you where you really are able to take in what I'm saying about how overwhelming all this is. I feel so close to you in moments like this. That is catching good. And what we know from the research is if somebody is not severely disordered, or if they're not so far in the extreme that they have a severe form of narcissistic personality disorder, or they're even malignant, have malignant narcissism, that when we put the focus on reminders of how they're connected to others, of how they can be caring, when we put the focus on the ways they show empathy, their narcissism drops. It's fascinating what the research has shown in this, where it's not just that they're able to be more caring in a moment, but they're less interested in seeking fame on self-report measures than, say, somebody who's narcissistic who doesn't have these kinds of reminders or prompts. So catching good is a really easy thing to do. You can do it with your child. So I remember from the previous episode where I talked about what causes unhealthy narcissism, we know from the research that there's a genetic component to this, that some people were born with a higher drive to feel special, that children who are melodramatic and attention-seeking and chronic rule breakers, and Phoebe Kramer, the psychologist, Phoebe Kramer's research, the 20-year longitudinal study she did, those are the kids who are more likely to grow up to become narcissists if they didn't have a secure attachment experience. So again, it's that combination of environment and temperament, and a particular difficult temperament. But with children, especially, you get much further by focusing on the moments that they're doing things right than confronting them all the time with what they're doing wrong. This is particularly the case with an extremely narcissistic, potentially extremely narcissistic, I should say, child, where you're seeing these things. Focus on the moments where they are holding their sister's hand or their brother's hand, where they show compassion about a character in a story. Oh, that's such a, Tommy, that's such a sweet side of you. You can be so sensitive. You can be so caring. And, it's so wonderful that you opened your heart to that girl in that way, or you told her that you were sorry that she was hurt. That is an example of catching good. Adults and children are going to have moments, and we need to focus our attention on those. In the workplace, especially, catching good is a great technique. If you've got a boss or a colleague, you very often can't confront them with all kinds of nastiness that they're engaging in. But you can catch moments like, oh, that was really great. Thanks so much for backing me up. And when I went out to get coffee, it really feels like we're part of a team. And I just know that we can get a lot done together when we're on the same page like that. That's an example of catching good if you've got a more narcissistic colleague. Thing I should mention about the workplace is there's a direct parallel between workplace trouble and romantic trouble. There are stop signs there too. If you're in a workplace where a boss is actually calling you names, or excluding you from meetings, or using unfair punitive measures, subjecting you to constant tearing down in front of other people, that is bullying. Those are some of the top signs of workplace bullying, according to Workplace Bullying Institute researchers Ruth and Gary Namey. And you need to get help with that. In the same way I talked about the stop signs where you need to get help leaving, you need to consider going to HR if it's a supportive HR. Now, you need to be careful about that, and I go into lots of detail in Rethinking Narcissism and how to decide whether or not it makes sense for you to do that. But the point is, you don't want to even be trying to just handle these things on your own. I want to talk also about what to do if you can't leave a relationship. If you are in a relationship where you share custody of a child, or you're in the workplace and you can't leave right away, and you want to protect yourself, because there are going to be relationships with your parent where, say, something like catching good isn't going to do much of anything, and it's just a toxic relationship, particularly in the case of bullying or emotional abuse. What I recommend then is something I call a connection contract. What's a connection contract? Connection contract is where you spell out in exquisite detail exactly the behaviors, exactly the kinds of experiences that will keep you from being present. Because if you've gotten to this point, your presence is as much as you should promise. I had a client I worked with whose mother, whenever she came home, would often tear into her about her weight. She even called her fat. She would get, her mother would get drunk and say egregious, awful things. Her mother was clearly extremely narcissistic. But my client, and this often happens for people, wanted to go home to see her siblings whom she loved. She wanted to be able to spend time in the house. So I recommended a connection contract. This is, you spell out ahead of time exactly what it is, exactly the behaviors. Mom, I really want to come home. I want to stay home. You're my mother. I care about you. And I want to see my sisters. I love my sisters. But if I hear you call me fat, If you drink too much and start criticizing me, that will tell me I'm not safe to stay in the house and I'll have to make arrangements elsewhere. A connection contract is incredibly effective because it predicts behavior. Nobody likes to have their behavior predicted, least of all extremely narcissistic people. So what I find is the majority of time when people use a connection contract as I've instructed them to, the person, their parent or their friend or, whomever, is on better behavior. They might grumble when they first hear it, and then when you get together and on better behavior. The thing here is you want to have an exit strategy. You want to have an alternative plan. For her, I made sure that she and I had walked through, will she have a place to stay with a friend, or does she have a little money to stay at a nearby hotel or something along those lines, so that she doesn't have to be exposed to anything she doesn't want to. But very often, even the most narcissistic parent wants to have some presence from their child. So this actually puts them on better behavior. That's a connection contract. I realized there was one other. I want to give you this will be a bonus, because I mentioned playing hot potato and how often that happens in the workplace. One of the ways that you can cope with unhealthy narcissism in the workplace is what I call blocking the pass. This is where the boss has had that hard day and is laying into you about, oh, you did this wrong, you did that wrong, everything is wrong. And what you do with blocking the pass is you work backwards from what you're feeling. I'm feeling unsure of myself. I'm feeling like I'm incapable. And you guess, probably accurately, using your gut of how you're feeling, that this is what that other person is feeling and they're trying to toss it to you. Blocking the past means naming that feeling in some way on both people's behalf. And again, you can use this other relationships too. Dan, it seems like you're really concerned about the project today and it going off the rails. Can you tell me what it is that's got you feeling less sure of where we are things today as opposed to yesterday, and what specific steps you think would help? What do you think we might need? What do you think needs to happen? I just get the sense that you're feeling in a worse place about this today. That is called blocking the pass. And the hope is if somebody is not so far gone with narcissism that they can recognize this is coming from them and it has nothing to do with the quality of your work. And they might even be able to in a number of instances with clients, I have had them report that they've done this and their boss or colleague has said, yeah, I'm feeling pressure from above. There's this, there's that. They want this report on this time, and the deadlines have changed, and they were able to talk about it, and it actually settles things down, because when somebody is not trying to get rid of their feelings of insecurity in this way, things do settle down. So there's another simple strategy you can use, again, in rethinking narcissism, both in handling spouses and partners. Let me give you one more bonus in handling spouses and partners. I go into a lot of detail with this, a 3-week strategy for deciding should I stay or should I go, whether or not there's hope in a relationship. I have 6 research-backed strategies for dealing with narcissists in the workplace. And I've already mentioned earlier, I have the 8 keys for helping with parenting. They're all research-backed, and they've all been confirmed. Many of them have been confirmed recently by direct research since I've written Rethinking Narcissism. So another approach you can use is something I call an empathy prompt. An empathy prompt is where you affirm the relationship in some way. This is a way of sending a signal. You can think of it as inviting the person to have a secure attachment experience. It's sending a signal that you are special to them and they are special to you, and in particular that they are special to you. You affirm the importance of the relationship, and then you share from the most vulnerable place possible. Our tendency when we're faced with really narcissistic partners or friends or whoever that we're close to is to either shut down or get angry. We know this from the research. This gives you a voice. So an empathy prompt I'm going to go back to the example of my mother. Told you the story of how she really wasn't participating in the move at all. And she was criticizing the whole time. I gave you some pretty mild examples, but my mother, when I was growing up, could also be emotionally abusive. And she'd call me a spoiled little brat when she didn't like what I did, or when I didn't do something that she wanted. And she was certainly being very demeaning during the move. She was even accusing me of using the money that we had raised to help her move through our own blood, sweat, and tears. And she didn't participate at all, really, in the move. And it was a huge amount of stuff that we had to either throw out or get into a truck. We did it all ourselves. We fronted our own money, and we used money from selling what little there was that she'd had left that she hadn't spent down to fund the move. She actually accused me of stealing the money. It was appalling. So, what I learned over time how to talk to her was an example of an empathy prompt. Mom, I love you and I care about you. You're so important in my life. And that is why it's so devastating to me. I feel so alone right now in this move. It would be so wonderful for you to be a part of it instead of pulling away like this. I need you in this. It's so overwhelming. Dad just died. And to be able to have you, my mother, be a part of it would feel so much better. And again, I feel so sad and alone with this, and I think Jennifer does too. That was a lengthy example because I'm speaking extemporaneously, but it only has two parts. It's really simple. Affirm the relationship. You're important to me. Speak from a vulnerable place. I'm feeling sad, lonely, overwhelmed, scared, instead of blasting the person, because it's their pain that you want to touch them. People who are capable of empathy at all melt when they hear empathy prompts. If they are simply blocked, if they're simply preoccupied, it unblocks them. It does something that in the research is called communal activation. Terrible, clunky phrase, but that's what it does, and it helps reduce narcissism. And if it doesn't, it speaks volumes about the possibility in the relationship. And that's where you might want to view it as another one of those stop signs. If people don't respond, if they don't soften in the face of empathy prompts. Over time, in figuring all this out with my mother, I came to some peace with her, and before she died. And we didn't have a perfect relationship, but certainly we interacted in better ways because I used empathy prompts. Even when she was struggling with addiction, and she struggled with narcotic addiction, and she would try to tell me that she hadn't taken something when I knew she had. And what got to her was when I tearfully said, Mom, I love you and I just want you to be here to meet your grandchildren. I want you to be a part of their life, and I'm afraid of losing you. I'm afraid I'm losing you to this. And that's all I said. No confrontation. And she teared up. This is how I eventually actually got her into a treatment program. And this from us often having shouting matches where I told her that she was one of the most insensitive people I ever met, for example. I came a long way from that. And I came a long way from that because I understood a lot more about what was going on, which is her difficulty being open about her own overwhelm, her own pain, and how I could reach her in these moments with empathy prompts. So I hope you find them helpful too. Again, don't use any of this if you're seeing the 3 stop signs. There are lots of things that cause physical and emotional abuse, for example, not just narcissism. the question shouldn't be whether or not your partner is narcissistic. The question should be, are you being physically or emotionally abused? That's the first question. And if the answer is yes, it needs to stop. And if it isn't going to stop, then you need help and you need support figuring out next steps. So the take home from all of this I want you to have is that these tells, once you recognize them, and I go into much more detail in the book about different tells, different types of dodging vulnerability and examples, and plenty of templates like the empathy prompts that are very easy, that don't require work. Remember, that's a 2-step process. Emphasize the importance of the person to you, and then share your most vulnerable feelings about how you're being impacted. That's it. So all of them are very straightforward, and they come from all this new science. And I hope you find it helpful too. If you're interested in hearing more about rethinking narcissism, the bad and surprising good, want to read more about the book, again, you can go to www.drcraigmalkin.com, the book. You can also go to drcraigmalkin.com, drcraigmalkin, as in Nancy.com, the test, and take the online version of the brief narcissism spectrum scale to see where you can even use it to see where other people fall on the spectrum. There's no reason, and many people have done this. You can take it to see where your partner falls by answering the questions as you think they would fit, or they might answer them themselves. And if you would like, again, I have another episode to share with you, but if you're interested right now in getting the book, you can go to the book, and I have links. I should mention that the book has a UK version that is called The Narcissist Test, but it's the exact same book, and there are links for that as well. And you can purchase it right there on my website. So I hope you've enjoyed today's podcast episode about my book, Rethinking Narcissism, the Bad and Surprising Good. And I hope it's given you a better, about feeling special. And I hope it's given you a better understanding of what are all the benefits of thinking about narcissism in a different way, and how it actually helps us protect ourselves and helps us navigate relationships more easily. And thanks again for listening. I hope you look forward to the next episode, where I'm actually be talking about something that's on all our minds. I'm going to be talking about social media and the problem of our concerns that we have, all the concerns about rampant narcissism, and is social media causing narcissism. And I'm going to lay out for you my thoughts on that again come from integrating a great deal of recent research on exactly how social media affects us and what it might have to do with narcissism. And that'll be in the next episode, and I look forward to sharing that with you. Thanks again for listening. I'm Dr. Craig Malkin.